It's a quiet evening in rural southern Taiwan. Inside a dimly lit temple restroom, a janitor makes a routine check and notices a plastic bag sitting oddly on a toilet's water tank. Curious, and a bit irritated at the litter, he opens it. What he finds inside will soon shock an entire nation. Wrapped beneath layers of clothes and plastic is a human head, dried, shriveled, and strangely covered in coarse grains of salt. The discovery of this pickled head in March 2013 marked the beginning of one of Taiwan's most gruesome and perplexing murder cases, one that shocked the island with its brutality. Media would soon dub it the pickled head case, and as investigators would learn, the truth behind it was as bizarre as the find itself. Who was the victim? Who left a human head in a public toilet, and why? The answers lay in a twisted tale of family, greed, and a chilling deception by someone claiming to be a good Samaritan. It all started with an anonymous letter. Just hours before the grisly discovery, police in New Taipei City, over 150 miles north of that temple, received a strange note in the mail. The handwritten message read, "Chen Wanting's body is in the men's restroom of the park, 200 meters from the Shuishang Farmers Association in Chiayi. I can't handle it. Please help." It was signed, "Good-hearted person." The letter begged the authorities to ensure a proper burial for Chen Wanting. Officers reacted quickly, alerting colleagues down in Chiayi County to search the specified public toilet. And indeed, that evening, March 15, 2013, in a park restroom by a temple, they found the salt-preserved head of a woman inside a bag, along with a note bearing one name, Chen Wanting. The victim had been identified, and a mystery began to unravel. Chen Wanting, it turned out, had been reported missing a few months earlier. In fact, when police checked the missing persons database, they found dozens of entries for women named Chen Wanting, but one in particular matched. A 36-year-old from New Taipei City who had vanished in late 2012. Her family was contacted, and her mother and brother traveled to Chiayi to help identify the remains. At the morgue, Wanting's mother recognized the clothing layers that had been wrapped around the head. She herself had bought those clothes for her daughter. The head was desiccated and shrunken from the salt, the face barely recognizable, but one detail stood out. The upper front teeth were missing, just like her daughter's had been. Heartbroken, the mother confirmed the victim was indeed her child, Chen Wanting. She wept in horror. Her daughter was dead, murdered, and grotesquely preserved. But who could have done this to Wanting? And who was the good-hearted tipster who led police to the head? Almost immediately, suspicion began to focus close to home, very close. Chen Wanting's older brother, Chen Chia-si-a-fu, had been the one living with her before she disappeared, and now he was acting strangely. Investigators noticed inconsistencies and clues that pointed to him. For one, that anonymous letter had been mailed to the exact police precinct where Wanting's missing person report was filed, a detail likely only the family or someone involved in the case would know. It also used her official name, Chen Wanting. Interestingly, Wanting was a name she had adopted in adulthood. Previously, she had been known as Chen Shu-hui, and neighbors still called her by a nickname, Ah Hui. An unrelated Good Samaritan or passerby would probably not know to use the name Wanting, but her family would. The more the police learned, the more the spotlight turned to her 38-year-old brother, Chia-fu, as a prime suspect. To understand this story, we need to understand who Chen Wanting was and her complicated relationship with her brother. By all accounts, Wanting's life was a tragic one. Years earlier, as a teenager, she had married and even had a child, but the marriage ended badly. Her husband cheated on her, and the heartbreak drove Wanting into a severe mental breakdown. She attempted suicide but was saved at the last moment. However, her mental health never fully recovered. Diagnosed with psychiatric issues, Wanting's behavior in the years afterward grew erratic. Neighbors recall that although she was still a relatively young woman and described as once very pretty, she would wander the streets of her Sanchong neighborhood in pajamas and heavy makeup, muttering to herself or laughing inappropriately. Some locals cruelly nicknamed her Little Sweetie after a chubby celebrity because of her odd, disheveled presence. It was an open secret that Wanting struggled to support herself. She received a modest government disability subsidy of about NT $8,000, roughly USD $270 per month, which her brother Chia Fu, with whom she lived, doled out to her in portions. Desperate for extra money, especially to feed her heavy smoking habit, Wanting resorted to troubling means. She would allow men in the neighborhood to touch her or have sex with her for small amounts of cash, sometimes as little as NT $500, around $7 per encounter. In other words, Wanting was effectively engaging in prostitution, driven by her mental illness and need for cigarette money. Neighbors occasionally saw strange men coming to her flat, and her behavior brought shame and embarrassment to her family. One particularly disturbing claim later emerged. Wanting had allegedly told some neighbors that her brother would only give her money if I sleep with him. Whether this was the delusion of an unstable mind or a sign of deeper abuse is unclear, but it paints a picture of a deeply dysfunctional sibling relationship. What is clear is that Chen Chia-fu was growing increasingly frustrated and humiliated by his sister's erratic and sexual behavior in their community. He was heard complaining about how she had tarnished the family's reputation. At the same time, Chia-fu had troubles of his own mounting. Chen Chia-fu worked as a cook at a local self-serve cafeteria, earning a modest income. In 2012, he had made a big life change. Through a matchmaking service, he married a woman from mainland China, a PRC bride, which cost him a significant sum of money in fees. In fact, he had to borrow money to afford this marriage. With a new wife to support and mounting debts, Chia-fu's financial situation was dire. Money was tight, and arguments over finances were frequent in the household. At one point, Chia-fu had even worked briefly as an insurance salesman, so he knew a thing or two about insurance policies. And as he looked at his mentally ill, vulnerable sister, whom he increasingly resented, a sinister idea began to take shape. By mid-2012, Chia-fu set his deadly plan in motion. He started taking out life insurance policies on his sister, Chen Wanting, making himself the beneficiary. Over several months, he purchased 5 different insurance policies on her life. The combined payout of these policies would be around NT $6 to $7 million, roughly US $200,000, a fortune to a struggling cook. Notably, one of the policies lapsed at one point because Chia-fu couldn't keep up with the premiums, a sign of how desperate his finances were. But even with 4 policies active, if he could somehow get the insurance money, it might solve all his problems. Of course, those policies would only pay out in the event of Wanting's death. And usually, if someone goes missing, you'd have to wait 7 years to have them legally declared dead in order to collect insurance. Chia-fu was not about to wait 7 years. He needed a quicker solution. Sometime in late 2012, Chia-fu's scheme turned deadly. The breaking point came on December 9, 2012, a date later pinpointed by investigators. Early that morning, Chia-fu was reportedly woken up by a series of phone calls. The calls were for his sister, likely from men trying to arrange a meetup with Wanting for sex. It was a final straw for Chia-fu. He was furious that, yet again, his unstable sister was off with some client, selling herself and, in his view, shaming the family. Later that same day, their mother had come by the apartment for a brief visit to check on Wanting. Seeing an opportunity, Chia Fu noted that once his mother left, she wouldn't be back for a couple of days. He would have a window of time alone with Wanting. And so, that night, according to court records, Chin Chia Fu decided to act on his murderous plan. In the small hours of December 9, 2012, at the siblings' apartment in New Taipei City, Chin Chia Fu attacked his 35-year-old sister. He strangled Wanting with his bare hands, likely catching her off guard. She struggled, but Chia Fu was determined. As horrific as it is to imagine, he choked her until she lost consciousness. Yet evidence suggests Wanting might have still been alive when Chia Fu took the next ghastly step. Grabbing a large kitchen knife, described as a heavy Wenwu cleaver, he began to cut through his own sister's neck. Chia Fu continued until her head was completely severed from her body. Later forensic analysis indicated that Wanting's heart may not have completely stopped before he began cutting, meaning she was possibly still alive as he carried out the act. It's a detail that underscores the cruelty of the act. But Chia Fu didn't stop there. His goal was not just to kill, but to dispose of his sister's remains in a way that eliminated evidence, or at least delayed its discovery, until he could make his insurance claim. What followed was a gruesome exercise in body disposal. Using skills one might cynically say he learned as a chef, Chia Fu dismembered his sister's corpse methodically. He had actually borrowed a large kitchen cleaver and a pair of gloves from his restaurant job a few days prior, indicating premeditation. With this knife, he cut his sister's body into pieces. Then, in an almost unimaginably macabre step, he took out a meat grinder, yes, a machine for grinding meat, and fed parts of Wanting's remains into it. He ground up portions of her remains into unrecognizable pieces, which he then disposed of by flushing down the toilet or washing down the drain of the apartment bathroom. Later, neighbors in the apartment building would tell police that around that time, their plumbing became clogged with a strange, greasy, reddish substance, even overflowing in some places. One downstairs neighbor recalled greasy bits seeping up through a floor drain, likely the remnants of Wanting's body that Chia Fu had tried to dispose of. Not all of the remains could be dealt with so easily. Large bones and certain body parts may have been discarded separately, perhaps in garbage bags that Chia Fu hauled off, which might explain why CCTV later showed him carrying multiple heavy bags. But one part of Wanting's body, Chia Fu deliberately set aside, her head. The head was crucial to his plan. It would be the proof of her death when the time came to cash in the insurance. Yet, he couldn't reveal it immediately. That would point straight to him. Instead, Chia Fu needed to hide the head, preserve it, and later discover it far from home in a way that wouldn't implicate him. So he turned to a preservation technique he knew from his kitchen: salt. Chia Fu covered his sister's severed head in a thick layer of coarse salt, rubbing it into the skin and packing it around the head. In effect, he pickled the head, an old method used to cure and preserve meat. The salt would dry out the tissue, prevent rot and odor, and keep the head from decomposing too quickly. Chia Fu's goal was to keep Wanting's head in a state where, even weeks or months later, it would remain intact enough to be recognized, or at least identified via dental records. Once he was ready to find it, he wrapped the salt-covered head in layer after layer of plastic and cloth. In fact, when police eventually unwrapped it, they counted at least 7 layers. First, the head was swaddled in a pair of the victim's women's underwear, then a pair of shorts, a t-shirt, a jacket, then tied inside a feed sack, placed into a convenience store plastic bag, and finally encased in a larger supermarket shopping bag. It was an elaborate wrapping, meant to conceal the head and contain any seepage or smell. Some of these items weren't chosen at random. Investigators later realized Chia Fu had an ulterior motive with the choice of wrapping. The women's underwear he used to cover the head was stained with semen from multiple men. Wanting had engaged in sex work with various clients, and traces of at least 2 different men's DNA were found on that garment. By wrapping it around the head, Chia Fu was deliberately planting a misleading clue, trying to make it look like Wanting had been sexually assaulted and murdered by some client or stranger rather than killed by someone she knew. It was a devious attempt to misdirect the investigation. With Wanting's head salted and securely packaged, Chia Fu stashed it somewhere safe for the time being, most likely in his refrigerator or freezer at home. In fact, in the weeks after the murder, Chia Fu's new wife, the woman from China, later said she made a horrifying discovery in that apartment. One day, she opened their freezer, only to find a human head inside frozen solid. That image is the stuff of nightmares. Fearing that she might be in danger and that her husband might kill her next, Chia Fu's wife fled Taiwan as fast as she could. She bought a one-way plane ticket back to her home province in China, under the pretext of attending a funeral, and there she stayed. When questioned by Chinese authorities later, she explained that she'd found her sister-in-law's head in the freezer and panicked. She genuinely thought she could be next. Chillingly, she did not alert the Taiwanese police at the time. Perhaps she was too frightened or in shock. She simply ran. Meanwhile, back in Taipei, Chia Fu played the role of the concerned brother. He reported Chen Wanting missing to the local police, maintaining that she had simply disappeared one day in December 2012. In truth, of course, he knew exactly where she was, or at least where her remains were. For the next 3 months, Chia Fu lay low. He likely kept an eye on the insurance policies, knowing that without a confirmed death, he'd be waiting years for a payout. At some point, his impatience or need for money grew too great. He decided it was time to execute the final phase of his plan, the discovery of his sister's remains, in such a way that the police would think some unknown killer was at work. So in mid-March 2013, Chen Chia Fu took action. In the pre-dawn hours of March 13, 2013, a Wednesday, he quietly left his apartment, carrying a large plastic bag that held his sister's preserved head. Security camera footage later showed him that morning, around 4 a.m., stepping out of his home lugging 3 big garbage bags filled with unknown contents. It's possible the other bags contained remaining body parts or other incriminating trash that he planned to dump separately. Chia Fu headed to Taipei's main train station and boarded a train heading south. He had chosen the destination intentionally, Chiayi, a county in the south of Taiwan where he had once done his military service. He knew the area and perhaps had confidence he could move there without drawing attention. During the journey, cell phone records later showed Chia Fu's phone signal pinging towers along Taiwan's western coast, first in Taichung, midway down the island, then further south. By late morning, he arrived in Chiayi. To avoid being recognized, Chia Fu went as far as to disguise himself. Surveillance cameras in Chiayi caught images of a man matching his build who appeared to be wearing a wig and different clothes, wandering along a roadside near the small town of Shuishang. The man was carrying a plastic bag that, by all indications, contained the object of Chia Fu's journey, his sister's head. Shuishang Township is a quiet rural area, but it is home to one notable site, an old temple called Xuansu Shang Ti Gong. Adjacent to this temple is a public park and restroom that visitors and pilgrims use. Chia Fu headed for this lonely restroom. Sometime on March 14, 2013, the day after he left Taipei, he found the men's bathroom empty. There, he took the plastic-wrapped bundle containing Wanting's head and placed it carefully on top of the toilet's water tank in one of the stalls. It was a spot someone was bound to check eventually, but not immediately obvious to a casual glance. And he made sure to include one extra item in the bundle, a small piece of paper on which he had written his sister's name, Chen Wanting, likely to ensure that once found, the victim could be identified. His grim delivery made, Chia Fu slipped away from the temple grounds unnoticed. He discarded his wig and caught a train back to Taipei, hoping that what would happen next might look like a tragic mystery that had nothing to do with him. The final step was to send that anonymous, good-hearted person letter to the police. Chia Fu penned the note, in Chinese of course, with just enough detail to lead authorities to the gruesome find without implicating himself. He portrayed the letter writer as someone who had stumbled upon a body but couldn't deal with it. "I can't handle it, please help," the note pleaded. Importantly, he deliberately addressed it to the Datong police station in Sanchong, the precinct where he had reported Wanting missing, likely to ensure the letter would be taken seriously and connected to her case. He mailed it off, probably timing it so that it would arrive when he was safely back in Taipei with an alibi. And it worked. Almost. On March 15, 2013, that letter arrived, and the Sanchong police, upon reading it, immediately contacted their counterparts in Chiayi to investigate. The trap was set. Chia Fu expected that the discovery of his sister's remains would trigger the insurance payouts and that suspicion would fall on some unknown killer. Perhaps he thought he had committed the perfect crime. For a moment, Chen Chia Fu's plan seemed to unfold as he envisioned. The letter led police to the Temple Park Restroom in Chiayi. At about 6:00 p.m. on March 15, 2013, officers found the plastic bag exactly where the note indicated, on top of the toilet's water tank. Cautiously, they removed it and began unwrapping the layers of plastic and cloth. What they revealed was horrifying: the salt-encrusted head of an adult woman, desiccated and partially mummified from preservation. Even seasoned investigators were shaken by the macabre scene. The head had been cleanly cut at the jaw with no neck attached, and the eyes had sunk deep into the skull. One officer remarked that it seemed almost like a piece of dried meat, and that it appeared the head might have been kept cold or frozen, as it was unusually well preserved. Clearly, this was not a simple murder. Whoever did this had gone to lengths to pickle and hide the head. It was a bizarre modus operandi that immediately raised more questions than answers. However, within the bag, investigators found two critical clues. First, the slip of paper with the name Chen Wanting. Second, as they cataloged the clothing items wrapping the head, they took note of the woman's underwear that formed one of the inner layers. It was later sent for forensic testing. With the victim's name in hand, the police quickly cross-referenced missing person reports, and as mentioned earlier, they identified Chen Wanting of New Taipei City as the likely victim. The next day, Wanting's mother confirmed the identification through the personal effects and physical evidence. The case had now turned from a missing person search into a full-blown homicide investigation. And because of the extraordinary circumstances, multiple police units from Taipei, where Wanting lived, and Chiayi, where her head was found, began working together to solve it. From the start, detectives suspected that the anonymous, good-hearted tipster might actually be the killer. The way the letter was written, providing the victim's name and the precise location of the remains, felt more like a murderer trying to direct discovery rather than a random Samaritan. And if the killer was masquerading as a helpful stranger, it was likely someone who had a connection to the victim. Chen Chia Fu quickly rose to the top of the suspect list. When questioned, Chia Fu was calm and claimed he had no idea what happened to his sister. He said he was heartbroken that she was found dead, but investigators were already uncovering evidence that contradicted his innocent act. One of the first red flags was the insurance policies. As police dug into Wanting's financial records, they uncovered the multiple life insurance policies taken out in her name. All of them had been purchased by her brother, Chia Fu, starting in 2012. The total coverage was at least into $6 million, and Chia Fu was the sole beneficiary. This was highly suspicious. Why would a man of limited means pay premiums on so many insurance policies for his sister, who had mental disabilities and no significant assets? To the police, one grim answer made sense. He was planning to cash in on her death. It was a classic motive: greed. And now that a part of her body had surfaced, it looked like that plan was in motion. One of the first red flags was the insurance policies. As police dug into Wanting's financial records, they uncovered the multiple life insurance policies taken out in her name. All of them had been purchased by her brother, Chia Fu, starting in 2012. The total coverage was at least into $6 million, and Chia Fu was the sole beneficiary. This was highly suspicious. Why would a man of limited means pay premiums on so many insurance policies for his sister, who had mental disabilities and no significant assets? To the police, one grim answer made sense. He was planning to cash in on her death. It was a classic motive: greed. And now that a part of her body had surfaced, it looked like that plan was in motion. Investigators also turned their attention to Chia Fu's actions around the time Wanting vanished. They found out that in early December 2012, Chia Fu had taken a couple of days off from work unexpectedly and had even borrowed a cleaver and gloves from his workplace around that time. That coincided eerily with the suspected time of the murder. This indicated planning and preparation. Additionally, neighbors and CCTV footage provided more clues. Security cameras near the siblings' apartment in Sanchong yielded footage of Chia Fu in the pre-dawn hours after Wanting's disappearance, carrying large bags out of the building. Those bags, police believed, could very well have contained parts of the body or materials used to clean up the crime. Back in Chiayi, police obtained surveillance video from roads and areas near the temple. Sure enough, they spotted images of a man with a similar build to Chia Fu around the day before the head was found. This man was seen wearing a disguise, a wig, and different clothing, and carrying what looked like a heavy plastic bag near the park and temple where the head was later discovered. When Chia Fu was shown in Taipei, he had short hair. The man in the video had longer hair, apparently a wig. It was another piece of the puzzle that placed Chia Fu at the crime scene in Chiayi. Investigators further corroborated this with cell phone records, which traced Chia Fu's phone traveling from Taipei to Chiayi and back during the critical window of March 13 to 14. Forensic analysis of the physical evidence was equally damning. In Chia Fu's apartment, crime scene units discovered traces of blood in the bathroom, tiny specks caught in the grout between tiles and in the drains. Even after cleaning, minute blood traces remained, and DNA tests confirmed the blood was Chen Wanting's. They also found a heavy cleaver, the Wenwu knife, hidden away, and testing revealed it had microscopic traces of Wanting's DNA on the blade. It appeared to be the weapon used to kill her and dismember her body. Furthermore, investigators opened up the building's septic tank and found human biological residue that suggested someone had flushed body parts or fluids. While no large pieces were recovered, Chia Fu had done a thorough job in grinding and disposal. The evidence of abnormal matter in the sewage aligned with the gruesome disposal method they suspected. Specialized cadaver dogs from the New Taipei City Fire Department were even brought in to sniff around the apartment. They indicated the presence of decomposed human remains scent, confirming that Wanting's body had been in that space and likely dismembered there. Piece by piece, the facade of the good-hearted letter writer was falling apart, revealing a calculating fratricide. One particularly telling piece of evidence was the letter itself. the police had a handwriting expert compare the anonymous note to samples of Chiafu's handwriting. The result? A match. The letter had been written by Chen Chiafu. This essentially blew his Good Samaritan cover story out of the water. Confronted with this and other evidence, Chiafu offered no real explanations. He remained eerily quiet, often refusing to answer questions. At times during police interviews, he would simply lay his head down as if asleep, or give investigators a vacant grin as though nothing was wrong. Such behavior might have been an attempt to appear mentally unstable or simply a defiant act of sanction. Meanwhile, forensic results came back regarding the underwear with semen that Chiafu had used to wrap the head. As expected, DNA tests found genetic material from two unidentified men, but crucially, neither matched Chen Chiafu. This supported the theory that the semen came from strangers, likely clients of Wanting. Police managed to track down the men who were sources of the DNA. They were indeed men who admitted to having paid Wanting for sex in the past. Both had solid alibis for the time of the murder and no plausible connection to Chiayi. It became clear that Chiafu had planted this evidence to mislead the investigation. The supposed rape murder by a John scenario was entirely staged. This revelation further cemented the premeditated and cunning nature of Chiafu's crime. He had thought through even the forensic details in advance, a chilling level of calculation. By now, about 2 weeks after the head's discovery, police felt they had more than enough evidence to make an arrest. Chen Chiafu was formally arrested and charged with the murder of his sister, Chen Wanting, with the special allegation that it was done for financial gain, insurance fraud. The case that had shocked Taiwan was about to head to court, and the sensational details were making headlines. As the prosecution prepared for trial, the story captured the public's morbid fascination. A brother murdering his own sister, dismembering her, pickling her head, and attempting to frame some imaginary killer, all for money. It sounded like the plot of a particularly dark crime thriller, but it was painfully real. The trial of Chen Chiafu unfolded over the next year or so, with hearings that revealed the full grim story to the public. Prosecutors did not mince words. They portrayed Chiafu as a cold-blooded killer who brutally ended his sister's life out of greed and then tried to outsmart everyone with an elaborate cover-up. They highlighted how he had shown zero remorse. At no point had he confessed or apologized. In fact, throughout the legal proceedings, Chen Chiafu stubbornly maintained his innocence. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, he refused to admit to killing Wanting. This obstinance forced the court to go through all the evidence in detail. Investigators, forensics experts, and even Chiafu's own wife, speaking via communication from China, testified to the facts. The insurance policies, the CCTV footage, the DNA on the knife, the letter, the wife's discovery of the head, and more. It was overwhelming. Sensing that a conviction was likely, Chiafu and his defense appeared to shift strategies, implying that he was mentally unwell and perhaps not fully responsible for his actions. There was no disputing that he had a troubled family background. In fact, during the trial, it came out that Chiafu and Wanting's upbringing had been marred by domestic violence and that some family members had mental health issues. This, the defense suggested, could have contributed to Chiafu's distorted personality, but the most dramatic bid to avoid culpability came from Chiafu himself. On the stand, he made bizarre claims that left the courtroom stunned. He said that he was being influenced by external forces, specifically that aliens had implanted a microchip in his brain and were using laser beams to control him. These aliens, he claimed, were speaking to him in his head, urging him to commit suicide. It was a wild, incoherent story. On another occasion in court, Chia Fu suddenly collapsed, foaming at the mouth and appearing to have a seizure. Proceedings had to be paused as he was given medical attention. To some observers, it looked like he was attempting to feign insanity or a neurological disorder in order to escape a harsh punishment. After all, if he were judged legally insane, he might avoid prison or the death penalty. However, the court was not convinced. They ordered a thorough psychiatric evaluation of Chen Qiafu at the National Taiwan University Hospital, one of the best medical institutions in the country. The experts' conclusion? Qiafu was mentally fit and showed no signs of psychosis or neurological disorders. In other words, the alien story and the courtroom convulsions were likely an act. This aligned with what investigators privately suspected. In fact, one of Qiafu's cellmates later reported that in prison, Qiafu had bragged about fooling the authorities, saying, "The judges want to trick me into talking, but it's not that easy." He was lucid enough to strategize even behind bars. The facade of mental illness didn't hold up under professional scrutiny. Given the heinous nature of the crime, fratricide for money, with extraordinary cruelty, prosecutors sought the death penalty for Chen Qiafu. Taiwan does have capital punishment, usually carried out by firing squad for the most egregious murders, and this case seemed to qualify. Qiafu had murdered his own sister, dismembered her, and desecrated her body. It was premeditated and done for profit. He also continually lied and showed no remorse. If ever there was a case that cried out for the maximum penalty, the prosecutors argued this was it. The Taiwanese public, following the trial in the news, was largely horrified, and many felt he deserved death as well. But there was one person who still stood by Chen Qiafu, his mother. This is where the case took a heartbreaking turn. The mother of Chen Wanting and Chen Qiafu had effectively lost 2 children. Her daughter was brutally killed, and now her son was facing execution for it. In court, the elderly mother made a tearful plea for mercy. "Both of them are my children, whom I carried for 10 months, she sobbed, referring to pregnancy. "I've already lost my daughter. I just can't lose my son too. What's done is done. Please, Your Honor, forgive Afu," Qiafu's nickname. "Give him a chance." This emotional appeal struck a chord. The judge and the court took her words into consideration during sentencing. Additionally, the defense emphasized Qiafu's lack of prior criminal record and the abusive environment in which he was raised. Factors that, while not excusing his actions, perhaps explained how he could become so twisted. In June 2014, the Chiayi District Court delivered its verdict. Chen Qiafu was found guilty of murder, desecration of a corpse, and insurance fraud. However, the court declined to impose the death penalty. Citing Qiafu's disturbed upbringing and his mother's plea for leniency, the judges instead sentenced him to life in prison. They explicitly noted that executing Qiafu would leave his aging mother childless and compound the tragedy. Considering humaneness and familial bonds, the court is reluctant to impose death, the judgment essentially stated. Prosecutors, who had pushed for a death sentence, were dissatisfied, but Taiwan's justice system does allow some latitude for mercy. Qiafu showed little visible reaction when the sentence was read. True to form, he remained stoic, still insisting he was innocent and planning to appeal. The case went through the appeals process, first to the High Court, then to Taiwan's Supreme Court. Appeals in Taiwan for such cases typically review whether the punishment is appropriate and if there were any legal errors. In 2015, the Supreme Court of the Republic of China, Taiwan, upheld the lower court's decision, finalizing Chen Qiafu's sentence of life imprisonment. He would spend the rest of his days behind bars. Given Taiwan's system, life generally means at least 25 years before any possible parole consideration, and for a crime this notorious, it is unlikely Qiafu will ever be released. He is now incarcerated, reportedly a quiet prisoner, no longer the cocky trickster he thought himself to be. He never did confess to the crime. To this day, Chen Qiafu maintains that he did not kill his sister, despite all evidence to the contrary. He also pointedly has never revealed what he did with the rest of Wanting's body. Apart from her head, none of her other remains were ever recovered. Investigators strongly suspect that Qiafu indeed flushed much of her body through the plumbing or otherwise destroyed it, but without his cooperation, that part of the story remains a sad mystery. One other consequence: the insurance payout that motivated this horror never materialized for Qiafu. Naturally, once he was charged, and certainly after conviction, the insurance companies froze and later canceled the policies. By law, a beneficiary who murders the insured cannot receive a cent. Qiafu's entire plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of solving his financial woes, he traded his freedom for a prison cell. In a grim irony, he had gone to such lengths for money that he ended up ensuring he'd have no life to spend it even if he could get it. The Pickled Head case remains one of the most infamous crimes in Taiwan's modern history. The sheer gruesomeness of it, a man preserving his own sister's head in salt, and the cold-blooded motive behind it sent shudders through the public. It wasn't just the gore, it was the betrayal of family trust and the idea that someone would commit such horrors for an insurance payout. Talk shows, newspapers, and online forums in Taiwan buzzed for months with discussions about the case. Some debated whether life in prison was punishment enough, given the brutality. Others sympathized with the mother's impossible position. Many people simply could not fathom how Qiafu could do what he did. In the small rural community of Shushang, Chiayi, where Wanting's head was found, the local people had their own way of processing the event. Almost immediately, ghost stories began to circulate. The temple restroom where the head was discovered was seen as tainted by dark energy. Some locals claim that, on quiet nights, if you passed by that now infamous restroom, you could hear the faint sound of a woman weeping inside, or catch a glimpse of a pale woman in white hovering near the doorway. There was talk of dogs in the neighborhood howling inexplicably at midnight, as if sensing a spirit's presence. Whether one believes in such things or not, these tales reflected the collective unease and sorrow that the crime had left in its wake. The temple administrators grew concerned because the restroom, which was on temple grounds, not only spooked people, but also had become a morbid attraction of sorts for the curious. Ultimately, they decided to take it down. The old restroom was demolished and rebuilt a short distance away. The new facility was modern, clean, and had a different layout, hopefully to wipe away the grim memory. Locals say it's much nicer now, though. Tellingly, few are willing to use it alone at night. The shadow of what happened there will likely linger for a long time. For Chen Wanting's family, the aftermath is even more painful. They lost a beloved daughter in an unimaginably violent way, and they lost a son, not to murder, but to his own murderous deed. The mother, who pleaded for mercy, got her wish that her son's life be spared. But he is gone from her regardless, locked away in prison. In a very real sense, she lost both her children on the day Qiafu chose to kill his sister. It's a tragic coda that often gets lost in the sensational headlines. The remaining family must carry the burden of this horror forever. As for Chen Qiafu, Now in his 40s, he will have decades in prison to reflect on his actions, though whether he truly feels remorse is unknown. By all accounts during the trial, he remained unrepentant, sticking to fantastical denials. Perhaps in the solitude of a prison cell, he has nothing but time to confront the truth. The insurance money he coveted is long gone. The only riches he earned is infamy. This case is a grim reminder of how greed and desperation can warp a person's soul. It's frightening to think that Chia Fu almost got away with it. His plan was intricate and thought out. In some twisted way, one might even call it clever, had it not been so horrific. He nearly executed the perfect crime: murder with a missing body, an anonymous tip to lead authorities astray, evidence planted to mislead forensic investigators, and a built-in motive of money that he tried to disguise as something else. But in the end, a combination of diligent police work and Chia Fu's own slip-ups brought the truth to light. The letter that he hoped would save him ultimately helped convict him, once handwriting analysis exposed his lie. The very act of revealing the head to hasten the insurance payout also hastened his capture. In attempting to be the good-hearted hero of the story, he became its villain. The Pickled Head case has secured an unsettling place in Taiwan's collective memory. It's a story people invoke when talking about the extremes of criminal behavior, like an urban legend, except tragically true. For a global audience hearing this tale, it underscores that real life can be stranger and more chilling than fiction. A brother killing a sister is sadly not unprecedented, but salting a human head and hiding it in a public toilet to fake a murder mystery, that is something virtually unheard of. It speaks to a unique blend of cunning and cruelty. In the end, what lessons can be drawn from this case? Perhaps it reminds us to be vigilant, that sometimes danger comes not from the shadows or a stranger, but from those closest to the victim. It's also a tale about how far someone will go for money and how a conscience can be eroded by desperation and resentment. The case also highlights the importance of thorough police work, from tracking insurance records to analyzing CCTV footage across cities in solving such a convoluted crime. If not for those efforts, Chen Chia-fu might have walked free and even profited from his evil deed. The story of Chen Wanting's murder is a heart-wrenching one. A vulnerable woman betrayed by the very person who was supposed to care for her. And the story of Chen Chia-fu is a cautionary tale of a man who convinced himself that money was worth more than family and who tried to play the role of a helpful bystander to mask his role as a killer. In unmasking him, Taiwanese society was forced to reckon with a horrifying crime, but also perhaps found some solace in seeing justice served, however imperfectly. As we conclude this true crime chronicle, the image that lingers is that of a quiet temple bathroom in Chiayi and a single salted human head wrapped in layers of deception. It's an image that's hard to shake, one that symbolizes the depths of betrayal and the cold calculation of a murderer who nearly got away. The Pickled Head case will not be forgotten in Taiwan, and for those who have heard this story, it serves as a stark reminder that truth, as grotesque as it can be, often finds a way to surface, just as surely as that anonymous letter found its way to the police. The Good Samaritan was exposed as anything but good, and a mother's worst nightmare was laid bare. In the end, all that remains is sorrow, and the hope that such a crime is never repeated.